program. Well, I would like to welcome everyone here today for our public information meeting. If you haven't caught up with the fact yet, first of all, there is a map of the property behind you on the wall. The other thing is that we are not going to take questions until the end of the presentation, and we're asking people to sign up for that. So if during the presentation you think of a question, the sign-up sheet is on the counter in the kitchen, so feel free to get up and write your name down, and we'll take people in the order that they sign up. And then we would also like to welcome the people that have called in, and we will take questions from them also at the end of the meeting. If you have a question, we're asking you to come up to the podium and speak into that microphone, because we do have people at home listening, and that is mic'd so that they can hear what your questions would be. Okay, with that, the format of the meeting is we have some presentations for people that have been involved in this process, and we're going to let them speak. And then we have tried, Gary and I have been the recipients of many emails and questions over the last few weeks, and we have tried to put those questions into the presentation. So some of the things you may want to ask may be answered during the presentation. And if not, we'll welcome your questions afterwards. I'm going to have somebody that was on. We started this process with an ad hoc committee for the negotiations. And David Jessen was on that committee, and Dick Johnston, and David Adcock. And David Adcock is going to lead us off and talk about what they did with that, what that process was.
I'll try to make this. What am I doing right now? Am I close enough?
It'd be better. I can find you next to Gary. That's a better speaker and mic.
I'll try to make this as brief as possible so that you can handle any of your particular concerns during questions. But so there's just a few points I wanted to make. We were, the three of us, asked to assist the association about this time last year, a little later, and we held innumerable meetings with Chad Paul and Joyce Fulton amongst ourselves, and had surveyors involved. The negotiations were lengthy. You know, in any purchase like this of anything, a car, you know, the question is whether you got a good deal or not. Well, it's like beauty, it's in the eye of the beholder, I guess. But I can tell you from my prior life, where I was involved in a lot of merger and acquisition negotiations, I always used to tell my clients, if you walk away from negotiations and everybody feels good, that means somebody got screwed, okay? The best negotiations are those where everybody shares equal pain. When that happens, you know that the deal was thoroughly negotiated and you've done the best you can. And that's the way I view these negotiations. They were protracted, complex. You ought to know that it was complex. The Mitchell estate has an 800-pound gorilla in the room living with them every day, called the Internal Revenue Service, who has a keen interest in every aspect of that estate. We have probate court, and then you have many heirs of the estate who often have conflicting views about how to handle certain assets. And those considerations obviously played a role in this. One other point, and so at the end of the day, if you were to ask me, man, is this a terrific deal? I'm not going to tell you that. If I did, you know, is it a fair deal? Is it a fair deal? I think that Chad feels the same pain that I do in going through this process. It's in line with all the appraisals. So is it a fair deal? Yeah, it's a fair deal. And you have to decide whether or not the association will approve it or not. Let me just close by noting one other thing. I have been impressed with the rectitude that this board of the association has proceeded from day one. From day one, this board made it clear that regardless of whether they had the authority to do this transaction or not, that it would be submitted to the membership and that the association would live with that vote. They have been, and that was conveyed as well to Limited from the get-go. We do, under the articles and bylaws of the association, we don't have to be here today. The board had the authority to do this. But they said from day one they would not do it unless the association members supported it. And I was very impressed with that, as well as the responsiveness throughout these negotiations of the board. And I think you ought to be very proud of the quality and rectitude of your board and the way it's been handled. So with that, I'll end and just, if people have questions, I can answer.
Thank you. And we'll move on to the next and keep the questions for the end. Okay, the next slide, Jane. No, go back one. Okay. Talk about that. Just looking at what some of the things that we had in mind when we started this process, we thought about getting a partnership with the village or Old Baldy Foundation. And as David said, the negotiations were so lengthy that we really ran out of time for the vote for this year, but that's still one of the things we'll keep in mind if we do purchase the property, is to look towards some of those partnerships that we may have. The village has the ability to write grants for parks and things which we do not as an organization have. So that's one of the things we're looking ahead for. And now let's move to the next slide. We thought when this opportunity came up that this was an opportunity which we pursued at the time the village bought the site across the street next to their town hall, that we have felt on this property landlocked for a number of years without the ability to do any expansion at all to the current building or anything. What's happened since this building was built is that we have gone from a full-time person, one full-time. We now have 3 full-time and 2 part-time employees. And if you've been here in the day, it's tight. People trying to do their jobs when a lot of other things are going on. We also have a lot of storage needs. One of the things that we have had to keep is all the records of the association. In addition to that, if you've ever been upstairs to Karen's office, you can see the monumental documents that are kept for everything that was built on this island since the association was formed and the ARC was taken over. We're in the process of trying to lighten that load in terms of scanning some of our documents in and putting them in the cloud, but that still doesn't, we still have to keep the hard copies, and they are used on a daily basis with our ARC coordinator. We have kept, and I asked Carrie this morning on the way over, how many years do we keep the ballots for the elections of the Association. And she said from day one. And this year, one of the things we'll be looking at is to get some advice with our attorney on how long we have to keep these records. Because as you can see, they're just going into Carrie's office, going anywhere. Their cabinet stuff is stacked. And so we really do need the space for storage. At the present time, we're juggling activities, and we've had to deny some of our membership activities that they would like because we're short on space. We have had to say no to some sessions of a Tai Chi class. We have that overlapping with village council meetings. We couldn't schedule technology classes and have had to rely on the club to help us with that. And so, not short term, but long term, we need to be thinking about another conference room, maybe a small classroom, that type of thing. We're not talking about building a bigger meeting area. We're talking about things that would be used daily by the membership of the association. Okay, next slide. Another thing that we have mentioned in the past, that we are under a 25% impervious coverage rule, which is a state mandated rule, and so we cannot expand at all on our existing buildings. We are maxed out on that. If we had contiguous land, we could then expand this building to get the needed space. So we have parking problems, obviously, and we also think that it would be a bonus for our membership to be able to help preserve the Battery 4 Creekside site in historic preservation, and would look forward to being able to do something with that. At this time, I'd like for Dick Johnston, who has worked very, very hard over the years towards the preservation of the Battery 4 Creekside site, to give you a little bit of the history and background of that.
Thank you. Just microphone.
One or the other, talk into it. Just talk into it. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, guys. I have been, like a lot of things here, a few of us overhand things and all senses of the word over. But this is one, back when I was in the leadership role of association, and the building hadn't been here very long. And the historian in this region, Chris Swanville, actually property owner, I don't know if still is not, but he became aware after the building was going up what was being done. And actually, he got a little concerned, and he started an education effort for anybody that would listen. And so we did listen. And this is a blow-up of map or engineering drawings that were done in 1866 after the war. Or actually, this one, or the other one, this was sometime later because it reflects on the. But here is Battery 4. The black, this is the building we're in, and this is the chapel of the village hall, the light, just the quarry, all of us. The road that was put in subsequent to that is shown here. Those of you that are aware, this is the Battery 4 site, all of this. And so it's the most undisturbed site of Fort Home. If you see up there, the outline on the slide is Fort Home superimposed over the island Fort Holmes is larger than Fort Bishop. It is very significant historically. It's all part of the mission of the defense system for the city of Wilmington and the fort. That is the reason that the war lasted as long as it did in the early 1865. But the fort Wilmington stayed open. The fort Wilmington stayed open later than any of the other forts in the old Confederacy because Wilmington was open and because of this defense system. And we can go into that later. But I've got these things that I'll put these on the back wall. Anybody wants to ask some more questions? This is the map I said that was done in 1865. It's engineering drawings of cutaways of all parts of the old Fort Holmes. And this is that report. The rest of these are pretty well carved up. This is all lost to the road. This is out in the middle. This is the largest gunning place. That's out in the middle of the river. This is kind of carved up, but some of it is still there. Incidentally, you saw one of the earlier slides, the historical markers. I see some comments that y'all see the emails that get passed around. Some people like to kind of pull governments of us with emails, and sometimes it's a rumor. And it basically it says, well, the association, what the association care, and why you involved in all this. We put together a three-party group some 6 or 7 years ago, and it was the association and the village and overall foundation, and did some good things. Those 13 historical markers were put in as a result of that committee. Chris has been a very big part of that. We had 2 historians, the one that I mentioned, Chris Longo, and also a long-term property owner, Jack Reed, who was a historian about allocating hospitals. He pulled together these documents and had the ball pulled up when we did. This is the last one of these. I'll show you. It's the blown up version of the engineering drawings of Fort Holmes. And that's right out here. Over closer to the road, you might think that it's a news when you walk past it on the walkway. That is the magazine. It was the largest magazine in the, to my knowledge. Chris Longo said once we ever get control of this and put a brief on appropriate archaeological activity there, you would all be surprised if there's not still remaining important. If you go up to some of the other sites, one picture where explaining all that, but this is one that's just been done in places. There's 2 of these that I can clearly show you where the guns were. Without even having to go. When you stand up here and look out and look down and go, I mean, it's about 35, but that's not happening. It's all done manual pick and shovel by slaves and soldier labor. Done over a period of about a little over a year. Last one I'll tell you, of course, we're going to get into something. Sometimes it's not a problem, and it's on kind of passion of it, but I got commissioned a painting with Ann Carey. It was 6 or 7 years ago. But there is no picture, as it was in case of Fort Bishop. We don't have any photographic, but we took the different angles from the engineering drawings and kind of created what the best we can tell Fort Holmes looked like. This is Battery 4 of Fort Holmes, with the 4 gunning placements, the magazine, and how it fits with the I just believe that, again, some of the comments of why is it important. This is it as far as this part of our history, and we don't do everything we can to completely preserve it. We've missed an opportunity that we absolutely, it's on us put together a group. Each of 3 groups committed and donated $15,000 each. The village has been providing maintenance. With that money, paid for the developments. And prior to that, we had done the extension over the other side of the road, which was on a common area that the association already owned. And so now it's a more complete effort. And anything that could allow this to be disrupted or disturbed in future years, I think, is a real thing. The only thing that I'm not completely with, and I told Judy this with the current plan and board, is my strong feeling is that if this goes through, that the board, the current board and the association could be prepared to put a protecting covenant on this, a forever covenant that says no more, and I just put a figure, no more than 80% of that property could be disturbed at all. Whether it's just extending this building or not. Personally, I think it could be done if they want to do it like 90%. But no more than 80%. If it becomes a 50% kind of thing, to me, it's just would be the same as putting an office building or bed and breakfast in there. It would be the same disruptive nature of disturbing the park at the historical. So, sorry if I'm taking too long.
Thank you, Dick. And Dick will have his show and tell after the presentation if anybody is further interested in taking a look at those. We're next, our executive director, Carrie Moffitt, is going to talk about the financial process that we went through for this.
So as the ad hoc committee started their work, the original number that first came out of the first discussions that they had was $750,000. The appraisal that we had commissioned with a professional commercial appraiser who has done work for years here on Bald Head, the original appraisal that he came back with using comps on the island was $723,000. It was discovered a little bit later that there is a sort of a donut. There's a hole in the middle of it that would be considered wetland, and so that process, we went through that process and found that about 10% of the parcels was unbuildable. That's right there in the center. When you go out today, if you look on the left-hand side, there are some pink tags that are still there that you can see where that circular piece is. And the appraiser, given that 10% of the parcel was unbuildable, then reduced the amount of the appraisal down to $650,700. So that we went back to limited, and Chad was agreeable. We talked about it, and that was the appraisal, and that was the final agreed upon price for the purchase. Oh, yeah, and a good point. Even though that is the final amount, and I think we put it in the letter that Judy sent to the membership, the tax value through Brunswick County is just over $1.2 million of that parcel. The size of it is 1.3 acres, so it's and you can see it's on the survey that's in the back as well. So, so in trying to figure out how to pay for this, it's been interesting to watch the board talk about this and have these conversations over the last year. And I will tell you, just in observing that, they have discussed 80 ways to Sunday, from trying to figure out whether it's a short-term financing, it's a long-term financing, it's something we wanted to propose for.
No problem. It'll be here when you need it.
For 3 years, or was it for 15 years? And they talked about it numerous times. We ultimately ended up going to 3 different banks to try to find some sort of proposal. We gave them all the documentation that we needed, and if you'll bear with me, we thought it would be helpful for you to see the due diligence that the board has done over the last year and looking at all of the proposals that came back from these banks, as well as what was ultimately offered by Bald Head Limited. So the first bank that we went to is BHA, and BHA is our current lender. They hold a note on this building. We currently owe right at $89,000 on this building. We anticipate, we've been paying additional amount towards the principal on this building, so we anticipate that that'll be paid off in the year 2020. So what their first proposal came to us was to take the full amount of the, with the lease, the original mortgage separate, but then to loan us the $650,700 minus the 10% down payment of $586, plus the closing costs. The term that they would give us was 3 years at a 4.25% interest, as you can see with an origination fee. They, like you'll see, this is a pattern that is beginning to repeat itself throughout all of these proposals. There were requirements for first security interest on all receivables, lien rights, maintenance fees, special assessments, which meant that they would have first go at any of those deposits, lien toward any of those deposits. They would require monthly payments. There was not an annual sort of arrangement that they were willing to make. They were monthly payments. And that original proposal did drop. Our current rate on this building is 4.59%. It would have dropped that percentage down to 4.25%. The second proposal that they came back with to lengthen that amount to 6 years, and as you can see, the interest rate did go up to 5.5%. Same conditions as above, but again, the interest rate would go up. So that is what we came back from BB&T, and I think the board, that was one that the board talked about in depth and decided that was not desirable. There were 2 other banks that we went to. The next one was Park Sterling. It was located in Wilmington, and we requested a full amount. The terms they came back with was a 5-year note, amortized over 15 years with just over 4% interest. You can see that origination fee. And again, they, first security interest, what they wanted to use as collateral was not just the land next door, but also this building and the land that it sits on. The board was not inclined to do that. So next bank was North State, and I have to say they were they worked the numbers. We got back 6 different proposals from them, varying different. It's kind of the same proposal, but over different amounts of time. So what they proposed is that we would either take the note on the land, which is the $650,700, add in the $90,000 for this building, wrap everything in one note. This is one proposal, and the next was to take 2 separate loans. They required that we have all of our accounts with the bank, which was one of the conditions for all 6 of the proposals that they gave us. Again, first, security rights, and they actually asked for security rights on all assessments and all deposits. So every dollar that the association came in, they had first rights to. They wanted written approval of any hiring and firing of staff. They wanted written approval for any increase or decrease in assessment, so that essentially they would be, the board would have to get permission for any of those things that they wanted to do. So you can see there some of the numbers for that full amount was $750 over 3 years at a 4% rate. The other thing I should mention too is if we moved the current mortgage to any of these other banks, we would have to pay a prepayment penalty on our mortgage of 1%. So, and as we go through these, you'll see there's this sort of pattern repeats itself. That first one was to encompass all of it in one note. This splits the 2 of them out. So there are 2 separate loans. One is the Association Center for $90,000, and the other is that $660, which is the full amount for the lot next door. And you can see it stretches the association loan out for 6 years, which didn't seem reasonable when we're going to be paying it off in 4 years anyway. And then 3 years for the lot next door. They as well wanted a $20,000 monthly payment. So, and this lengthens those numbers out to 10 years. Go to the next slide, if you would. And we'll have this slide available, this PowerPoint available on the website later today for you guys to look through and look in more detail if you want. And again, it's the same requirement. They would allow us to do a monthly payment on the association center that would not impact our cash flow, but it was lengthening the lot next door to 10 years would add an additional $7,000 monthly payment. And the last proposal that they gave us was taking the two different proposals and linking it out to 15 years. So the last one to go through is what was offered by Limited, and we, in talking with Chad, this is what was finally discussed and what was finally agreed upon to put before the membership. Was the $650, $700 purchase price that we agreed to, minus 10% down at closing. The term would be 3 years at 4.25%. Chad was not charging any other fees, no origination fees or anything like that. They did agree to do 3 equal payments, principal and interest, and we would make the first one in February of 2017, 2018, and February of 2019. And they only required that parcel be the collateral. So after having all of this information, this is the proposal that the board ultimately decided to do.
Could I interject a point? Probably the biggest time suck in these negotiations was on financing. Much to my surprise, mortgage lending, the homeowners association, is a niche, and most banks won't make loans, the homeowners association. So poor David Jessen, for instance, dealt with BB&T. It took him weeks and weeks and weeks to get to the right person who was in some branch office down in Florida who handled their home loan, a homeowner's loan. So this took a long time, and as to the two lenders other than BB&T, Chad knew banks that could do that for us and do it on an expedited basis, which was helpful. This took a lot of time.
So with that 750,700 figure, we took the number of properties that we had and tried to come up with a proposed cost per property, because it is always about the numbers. So in taking the 880 homes that we currently have and the 500 and some unapproved properties or lots, the numbers come down to a 3-year assessment of $225 a year for a total of $675 for a home, $75 per year for a total of $225 per lot. One of the questions that I have gotten from a couple of homeowners is, if you have a merged lot, do you pay for several lots? And the answer is no. When you have a merged lot, you in fact have one lot, so you can pay one assessment. The board has, at its last meeting, did approve a payment plan. So if members could choose what they'd like to do, they can pay it in one payment, or they can make quarterly payments, so that their assessments would be due April, June, September, and November. One of the other questions that I've gotten is, should it be a special assessment, or should we enroll this into long-term financing? And again, I'll tell you, it's something that the board talked about numerous times in ways, 3 or 4 times that I can recall. And it is a question. I think there are, I belong to a professional association, and I do see articles that come through frequently that most often special assessments are used for emergencies. So if there's a storm and you didn't have money for the roof, that you would do a special assessment, and that would typically be what a special assessment is used for. But it's not uncommon for it to happen, for a special assessment to happen for any kind of unplanned capital expenditure. I think it is always a question of, long-term financing. Is that thousands of dollars in interest versus short-term financing? One of the things that the board talked about numerous times was debt and carrying debt for a number of years, and the amount of thousands of dollars that they would be paying in interest. And the thought of the association being completely debt-free in 4 years was of great value to them. Some other questions that I have gotten in particular are about maintenance and long-term maintenance. And so if we pay the $650 now, what does that mean long term? What are we going to have to pay for in the future? So there is a walkway and signage that is in there. We will roll the daily regular maintenance of that in. We already have a landscaper who comes and, for example, blows off the deck on a weekly basis, and I would anticipate we would include those kinds of things. Long-term maintenance in the walkway and signage, I do think what we should do is to have a study done, have a professional tell us what it would cost to replace portions or all of that and then roll that into the reserve. I don't anticipate it will be a great deal. I've talked with our insurance agent, and there will be no, in that he's gotten all the information about the parcel, and there will be no increases in the premium. I already have that confirmed in writing. Regarding the taxes, the property right now is not obviously designated as common area. If this agreement were to go through, we would, like that afternoon, go down to the county and have the property converted to common area. Now, we pay $100 per acre. Any common area is assessed at $100 per acre. So for the tax year 2016, Limited has agreed to cover the taxes for 2016. Typically, in an agreement, if we were to close in February, Limited would have paid the first month, and we would have to pay the other 11. Chad has agreed to cover the taxes for next year, or for this year. But for 2017, then the county would recognize that it is common area, and they would bill us at $100 per acre. And since it's 1.3 acres, it would be about $130 for the tax.
Okay, so what's next for us? Everybody should have gotten the proxies contained in the annual review that was mailed to you. If you vote by proxy, be sure that it comes to the association no later than Thursday the 28th, because the board will be voting the proxies that have been assigned to them Friday the 29th. If you're voting on if you decide to wait and vote at the annual meeting, you cannot use the proxy form that was mailed to you, but you must use a ballot that we will have here at the association. The form changes. So whether or not we go ahead with the purchase will be determined by the majority of those attending the annual meeting or voting by proxy. And at the end of the annual meeting, we should have the results of that election so that you will know at that time. Okay, some of the questions that have come about is, does the historic nature of the property make the parcel unbuildable? And the answer to that is no. That right now, that is not a protected historic site. And so somebody could come in there and build. That property is also not covered under the design guidelines. So they could build anything that was within the zoning rules of the village. So part of our concern is to do what Dick would like and to get some sort of historic protection on that property. A number of people have said that the lot's overpriced for the market. We felt we did due diligence by getting a professional commercial appraiser who's familiar with Bald Head, and as you saw, that appraisal allowed us to make some adjustments in the purchase price. And I think that David Adcock answered about the urgency, the problem that Limited is having with the settlement of George Mitchell's estate. And I think we are now ready for questions. And I don't know if we've had any sign-ups back there. Karen, do you want to check and see if people have signed up with questions? Very much. Okay, and if you remember to step up to the mic so people watching from home or listening on the phone can hear you. Joe Ridgway?
Yes, I don't care. I had a question.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Bob Porter?
All the same thing. No.
Well, then I would now ask, because we do have some time, whether anybody that didn't sign up now has a question. Brad?
Question or a statement?
Whatever.
Madam Chair, people worry about the development piece and the whole development piece of what you have here. You're not going to be able to expand this building and go easily at it. But right now, this facility, from a pervious surface standpoint, you can't expand this facility that we're in, or the piece that carries in the administration next door. What this property will do, you can utilize the impervious surface coverage associated with that property in your expansion here. So you can expand this building or carry building and go south, and you can expand the parking along the road up against the property. So it's not like you're buying a property that you can't build on. You're not going to be able to build and go east anyway, what you're going to get is impervious surface coverage. And so you were going to build there to apply to this site. The other thing about the POA allocation for the taxes on the property are about $12,000 a year. As Terry said, what we agreed to do, we'll pay the taxes for 2016. And the reason is that even if we're closed in February, it doesn't become a registered common area for tax purposes until 1/1 of the following year. So that's why we've got the arrangement. So what happens at closing, we'll basically write a check for the taxes based on last year's tax bill. And if the new assessment comes in from the county in September, and it's another $180, you guys are going to have to send us that bill. We'll agree we'll pay that bill for $180. Those are the two comments.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Microphone.
For the people who are listening on the phone but don't have the visual, would you show the previous slide that shows how much the value of the comparable parcels? Yeah, and just read that out loud so they can hear it because they can't see it. I'll just take that.
Yeah, some of the comparable parcels were that there was a $330,000 for 6.6 acres across the street, $589,000 for 0.51 acres property that is nearby on the creek. Okay, is there anybody on the phone that has a question? Okay, well, Carrie and I, do you want to put up the last slide? As usual, you can always, if you think of something later, you can stop by the office or email, or if you don't want to ask a question in front of this big group, we'll be here for another. The village council doesn't meet till 2:30, so we have plenty of time on an informal basis to chat with you. Anything else? Yes, Joe.
Sorry, could I ask a question?
Up to the microphone.
Firstly, I certainly support what Dick talked about in terms of historic preservation. Nowhere can I find that's a duty of all that state law association. I do find the association's duty is to maintain the common area. I think the efforts to date have been woefully inadequate and really have been very few, except the area right around here. Secondly, the key duty is to represent the non-BHA property owners, the non-voters amongst the property owners. And I really question how this particular acquisition would do that without leading to far more costs. It's only a matter of trees are cleared. What's the association's view on cutting down trees? And finally, it seems to me it's again an opportunity or a missed opportunity where the stage one association members are being taxed for the potential benefit of the entire island, including those not members of this particular association. And, aren't we going to surround this thing and get the one homeowners association and then as one group decide whether we want to be into preservation, refurbishment.
Thank you. Anybody else? This is about your last chance. Anybody? Tricia?
Jump right at it, I'll put in my plug. This wouldn't cost the BHA numbers as much to do if we were a merged organization. Costs were spread out over everybody. And that's one of the advantages of a merger taking place is over the long run, and there are additional costs. There maybe for various reasons over the coming years, those costs will spread over a wider base if we're a merged organization, as well as being an organization that can represent all of the property owners on the island.
Thank you, Tricia. Anyone else? Then I thank you all. Oh, John, up to the mic, please.
Couple of questions, but comments also. I tried to take a look at this in depth, and look at, of course, the due diligence has been well done, and I thank each and every one of you that's participated in that. But I think a couple of things, and I guess the question that comes as I go through this, I certainly see advantages to preservation, historical significance, the advantages to impervious zones that allow flexibility with the existing buildings here. Share the sentiment of Rick Johnson and others about encroachment on that property should be very minimal, if any, and only 80%, 90% of that could be untouched and preserved for historical purposes. I do see a missing link, and I do feel some responsibility with this island, all of this, I think, too, for historical preservation. One of your slides said as an added bonus historical preservation. I don't see it. I see it more of a primary responsibility. We should all take a piece out and share. We've got Fort Fisher. We've got Fort Castle. What's missing? Primary link in the center, which is Fort Holmes. There's opportunity there, not just for us, but historical preservation is, and these three belong together. We are a missing link. There's an opportunity. Who bears that responsibility and cost it up? My interest would be village council, village owning part of this. These for the question. I see special events that happen here all the time. You can just, and I do see opportunity now for potential partners along the edge. But I see that as something that might well be served by the village. So the question would be, if this acquisition moves forward, could a piece of this be sold off to the village to help with special event parking, and therein would relieve some of the debt burden to purchase this piece of property? I don't know if I yield that to limited.
That's been, you mean if the association purchased the property, could they do what you're talking about?
Purchase. I look at the map,
Yeah.
I have to go a little bit on it myself.
John, maybe this wasn't made as clear.
Could this piece be sold off for a special event party?
I can't speak for the board, but let me just go back to something that maybe was.
In theory.
Well, no. Let me finish. Early on, not day one, but close to day one, we had conversations about the village to explore that possibility. Exactly what you're talking about. Not making an offer, but would you be open to this? The prior village council, and I assume the current village council, is very open to it. The problem, okay, to do it exactly what you're talking about, and purchasing or however it was arranged. The problem was and is the estate is operating under a time frame, and I'm not going to put Chad on the spot, and I hope no one else would ask him to talk about that. But from what I understand, the estate is working under a time frame that is faster than the village can act. So it's just that simple.
I get all of that.
Yeah.
Here's my hypothetical.
Yeah.
Hypothetically, there's no restriction. The association can subdivide that property to do that transaction with the village. You want the village, the only thing, no restriction to deed is the association can't subdivide that property to build permanent residential lots. But when it comes to parking deal with the village, that's fine. As it relates to the state considerations, the thing that limited safety related to that is related to financing. Once Mr. Bishop's state closes, our ability to enter into the financing review is a hit wall. Right now, I have one shareholder of the state of Mitchell, and we can do the financing with the association today. When Mr. Bishop's state closes, then it's a totally different transaction, and I won't be able to put those financing in the foundation. I won't be able to do that. It'll sit on limited books as an operating receivable. So I can do things with the financing for 3 years now because Mr. Bishop's state is still open. That's really the big in terms of the stuff that I talked about. But no restriction in terms of there was a reason to subdivide it to create parking along the road, and the village participated in that, no problem. The only restriction, the only subdivision restriction, and it's even vetted by their attorney, is you can't subdivide it to go residential homes. That's the only restriction.
No, I don't thank you for the explanation. I think again, hypothetically, and I understand villages movement, government's movement, our government moves as slow as we know. But hypothetically, I think this would be a missed opportunity, especially with creative financing mechanism law. I think as far as the level. So 3 years goes by, 2 years goes by, whatever. Council may have opportunity to work with us on special events parking. And I see a huge plus for everyone, not just homeowner association, not just village, not just anybody. This island, special events require additional parking here. We all know the congestion problem. Today, where did you park today? You didn't get here super early. You know where I park. And I hope my car's still there when you get back. So, thank you for answering that question and clarification. My interest is that I think that is a great opportunity. It settles need for impervious zones or expansions or slight movement of these facilities. It serves for special event parking and expansions. It certainly serves, and again, I would push this a little higher than added benefit from a historical perspective. For Fisher, for homes, for Canada. It lends opportunity down the road that's almost unlimited to how we might market or advertise this island historically. And there are many historians and buffs that would come to see that pattern if they would exist, even in its current position, its current existing state. So that being said, I think it's a great opportunity. I think there is opportunity down the road for council.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much. Larry. Yeah, I thought we were going to early.
Having been mayor, the joint efforts looking at the walkways and all of that. I guess this is the right thing to do. We need to preserve this property. What I don't understand, maybe you are, but why isn't there a proposal to say to the council and get them to say, yes, we're going to park. You can work out the details later. Is there somebody this afternoon at 2:30 going to ask the council to park? That's my question. If not, I'm going to do it.
Okay. Larry, it has not been our intention. Our intention when we embarked on this, and we got into the middle of it when it became obvious that we would not have time to deal with the village was to make this, felt that this had to stand on its own when it went for a vote to our membership, because we could not have the type of guarantee that would have stood up to the test of scrutiny. And so a verbal, yes, we might with the village, I don't think would have helped us. So this deal has, the vote that's coming up at the end of this month has to stand on its own, and I think that's why we have not emphasized our other possibilities.
You will go a long way to making this event happen. Because there's too many out there who feel that you're the village that does. I think what you've done is great. I would like to see the finance committee involved in it, that they do help and get programs done and get things done. I didn't hear that name. I may be wrong, my assumption. It sounded like to me did not incorporate finance committee of the association. I think that's a shame. But right now, I think the important thing is to go to the council and get their commitment that they definitely will partner with you and you can work out the details after the vote.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you. Anyone else? Yes?
Maybe just follow on your point. The other thing that we've investigated is getting dollars grants, for vision grants and other grants that the developer cannot do, that only you can do as a nonprofit and as an association to get that done. And you can't get that ball rolling on hypothetical. So just like a potential partnership with the village for part of it, just like there's historic preservation grants out there that we can go help try to get. That all is on you can't take a decision on an unknown. But I think it's important that everybody knows that that's out there. And I think, right after the discussion with the village, the next stop is going to be all the various historic preservation and tourism, everybody else to get some grant money to help make that work, whether it be for improvements or to help to go towards the acquisition.
Thank you, Chad.
Also, we have grants from the county. They've given money for parks all over the county. Time to get some good job.
I agree, Larry. We need to get something back. Anybody else? Then I thank you all for coming and for your interest. And again, if you have further questions, Carrie or I will be happy, or David or any of the people that worked on this project, we'll be happy to chat with you. And I think Dick would be happy to share his, if you have interest in that, to share his diagrams with you if you have more questions with him. So thank you and very much. Next meeting starts at 2:30.
Oh, good news.